not a second-hand coat. I want a yacht, not a cheap little boat. I tell my daddy not to be depressed. All I need for happiness is the best. I want a diamond, nothing else has appeal. And when it comes to men, you know how I feel. I want a real man. Give me a real man, you know what I mean. I want a real man. Oh, real man, you're what I need.
I missed that last part. Hey, what's up? Welcome to Real Men. This is the men's magazine show for men and about men, where men get real. I'm your host, Tim Steeves, and we have an excellent panel of all-star yackers that are going to break it down today. So let's meet them, shall we? Chuck Byrn's here today. How are you, Chucky?
I'm great.
Excellent. Kate Ashby also joined us.
Hey.
Nice to see you, Kate.
I'm good. You didn't even ask me how I was, and I just...
And you knew it.
Volunteered it.
Steve Brinder dropped in. Good to see you, Steve-O.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And also, DWAYNE Hill is here. Good to see you, Dwayner.
Rainbows are pretty.
And Tim RYKERT also with us. We got the full powerhouse.
Hey, buddy.
Good to see you, Timmy. And that's how we're going to get the show started. Throw it over to that very same Tim RYKERT for a commentary. Go ahead, man.
Thanks, Tim. One of my first ever gigs in television, I did a sketch on a show that I actually wrote called Freak on the Street. In the sketch, I played a crazy man who goes on a daytime talk show which has crazy people on as their guests. I got a lot of compliments on the sketch. It was actually quite funny, but in hindsight, I actually kind of wish I didn't do it. I'm a libertarian, I'm a comic. I don't think any subject is taboo, but the man I was actually making fun of was an actual real person from my past who I had seen downtown Toronto a lot, who would just wander around screaming aimlessly into the sky. Well, he wasn't just crazy, he wasn't a man who was on drugs and alcohol, he was a schizophrenic. And the fact that he was on the street was very sad and appalling in a society that pays so much taxes and supposedly cares so much about its people. I don't think it's right. I think we need to get these people off the street no matter what. I think it should be numero uno priority that crazy people, people with serious mental illnesses, should not be out fending for themselves on the street. Am I crazy? Tim?
Nice job, Timmy. Grab some couch. Let's talk about this. I thought Tim was handling the subject very tactfully right up to when he said crazy people. I mean, but I understand what you're saying. Chuck, what do you think? Should this be a priority for us? Figure out?
Well, I mean, it'd be nice. It'd be nice if everybody that needed taken care of was taken care of. But, you know, plenty of crazy people won't stay in a hospital, won't stay in a care situation. They're right back out again. And a lot of people who have even been diagnosed with mental illness are fine with it. You know what I mean? I don't like taking my schizophrenia medication because I don't feel normal when I'm on it.
It makes me feel constipated. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does.
That movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that was really interesting because when they made the movie and it came out, people said, look at how terrible we treat these people and let them go out on the street and we'll give them their drugs to take at home, and it doesn't work.
Well,
so either way.
The old cliche is to take the drugs. You feel like you don't need the drugs anymore because they're working and you stop taking the drugs.
Because how do you know?
Well,
how do you know when you're mentally ill?
Especially when you're taking drugs for schizophrenia, you are coming through such a haze. The fact that they can function in any way at all is pretty mind-blowing. So, you know, I think that there is a huge difference probably from the person who's on, you know, when you have schizophrenia and you take drugs, you are a completely different person. You can function, not at a high level, but at least you can, I mean, even epileptics have take enormous amount of drugs to keep their seizures under control, and they are coming through such a haze that I have no idea how they function.
But one of the problems with it is that you don't know. Like, you don't know you're mentally ill, or you know, and the problem is someone's got to tell you that you do. You have to take medication.
Yeah, exactly.
But that we don't
mental
have
illness
anybody.
is very subjective. It really is. Throughout history, you know, mental illness was, you know, a child born with, you know, with a giant, you know, forehead was basically
a witch.
A witch. Burn the witch. But they were locked away. Like, they really were put away for a number of years. Then in the 70s, we said, oh, we can't keep doing this to people. I mean, there was, you know, frontal lobotomies, et cetera, shock treatment, all these horrible, horrible processes you've gone through. But let's face it, out of, a lot of people in this panel are comedians, and how many comedians you know that have unstable fits of rage, or do something stupid, or drive like morons, or get argumentative, or shut themselves out from the world for a couple weeks?
Dwayne, we all have the attention deficit.
I have no idea who said that.
Like since '88, everyone's been diagnosed with ADD.
But kids do have that. It's interesting because
But they've always had it.
I'll teach a class, but we can see, okay, these guys, they can't focus. So what is it? And is it all chemical? Is that what the game is? Is that the only way we can solve these problems is by a drug?
That's a good question, Steve.
Christie,
what do you think about that, Steve?
I think it's a combination of both.
It's
but
the
right
easiest
now,
way to make money.
And it's easy as Band-Aid.
Yeah.
One of the most common things with people who have mental illness is that they live in isolation and poverty. It's been proven that they have no money and they have no friends. So if anybody right now just thinks about no support groups, so no friends, that's number one. That's huge. You get nobody to keep you in balance, nobody to say, whatever. Friends are such an important...
Or the people that you have, you pushed away.
Right.
I mean, let's not make. I mean, you're not a complete victim. It's like I was saying earlier.
If you're mentally ill and you push them away because of your mental illness.
Well, yeah, but I mean, again, that's mental illness is subjective. I mean, we go through phases in our lives where we push friends away. We say, get away from me. You do stupid things.
But you can't help it because
not
I have a relative who's mentally ill. I can't take it anymore. It's the same crap we go over over and over and over again.
Which is why I think society needs to step in and do something for these people. I know one of the byproducts of freedom is you're free to also ruin your life and go out in the street. And you're free to not be forced to go into a mental hospital. And that's one of those freedoms that I'm a little wondering about whether or not we need to, because what problem with mentally ill people, a lot of them, their relatives aren't around, their friends aren't around, and someone needs to commit them. And without that permission, you cannot force somebody.
Right.
And once people have actually gone through and had medication and had help, the thing is the stigma on the job application, or if you lie, but if anybody knows that someone has has problems with mental illness, and I would think even just dating, friends, employer, it's a huge stigma that we're allowed to have problems with our bodies, but we're still not allowed to have problems with our minds. And people are still having a really hard time dealing with people who have.
Nice job, panel. We're out of time.
Right.
Good job, panel. We're going to come back from this break. We're going to be joined by a very special guest, Norm Christie, and we're going to talk about anti-heroes. Is Canada too hard on its heroes when we come back? Hey, welcome back to Real Men. We're joined this segment by Norm Christie, author and historian. Thanks for coming in, Norm.
No problem.
Appreciate it. You're going to lend us a lot of help here on this, I'm sure. And to get the segment kicked off, here's Kate Ashby. Go ahead, Kate.
I think that anybody who goes off to war and fights for the lives of other people is a hero. I don't think they need a specific event to mark their heroism. I think they're heroes for going and doing that. The one question that I have is, why does somebody join the military? Is it for a job? Is it for the adventure? Or is it to become a hero? What do you think, Tim?
Well, that's a good question, Kate. Jump into the couch. Let's welcome Norm. Good to see you, man. How are you?
Good, good.
So, heavy-duty topic. We're talking about military heroes, the anti-hero. Are we too hard on our heroes here in Canada?
Well, I think in Canada particularly, we've forgotten a lot of our heroes. We don't really give them any time at all. And when you look at some of the programs that have come out on television in the last 10 or 15 years, they've really been unfair to the people from this First and Second World War, particularly the Billy Bishop NFB documentary, and the McKenna brothers for the Valor and the Horror, which I think is really unfair to the men who went overseas.
Absolutely. Have you noticed things a little differently since September 11th?
Actually, in the last 4 or 5 years, you've seen a general trend of, in the newspapers particularly, and on all media, of more about the First and Second World War. It's been growing ever since, and of course, the September the 11th has made a huge difference.
Right.
Because the question of the cost of freedom is now relevant.
It's made all of us realize that it's just brought it so close to home. Like when it came to this continent in such a massive, destructive, we all just went, whoa, and ain't nobody protesting our ships leaving this time, and nobody's, you know what I mean? It's.
But I think we don't promote war heroes in this country. I mean, it's hard to compete with the U.S. when it comes to promoting, heroism. But we don't. I mean, as a Canadian in school, you rarely learn about. I mean, the most I know is from the post office ads.
Well,
They don't want to wave flags. You know, that's the problem that a lot of people have. You start waving the flags, and then we're all going to go. You see the movies where they never get killed. You were saying with the Valor and the Horror, one of the reasons they attacked that was because they said that the generals were stupid. And that was really badly planned. And the guys who went to war were victims. And what they said, that these guys, I don't think there's any question about these guys were brave, but a lot of these guys died because it was bad planning. Like Dieppe was a tragedy. Dieppe was, and they said, oh yeah, well, you know, Dieppe was okay later because we learned from D-Day. But it was a tragedy, and these guys died because it was badly planned. And you can't get away from that.
But war, I mean, war has got a lot of bad planning. I mean, that's one of the reasons. I mean, when you fight a war, you're going to make mistakes.
Jump in here, Norm.
You know,
it's total chaos in most cases. People you take a situation like the military in existence at the start of a war, it may be a few 100,000 men. And then by the end of the war, you've got a couple million men. And that means if you think of it from a management perspective, people at the beginning are now in bigger jobs, and they're over their head. They don't know what they're doing. They have to figure it out as they go along. And of course, it's how fast you learn determines whether or not you can win the war.
Which leads me to the thing that I asked off the top. Why do you think people join the military? Do you think it's with...
It depends on the time and place. I mean, a lot of World War II guys, I mean, it was the Great Depression. They got a 3 square meals. And
so it was a job.
It was a job. It's also adventure. If I live in a little town somewhere in northern Ontario, I get to go off to Europe.
Right.
In World War II, we were like the largest all-volunteer army in the world, too, I think. And then they kind of brought conscription in because of the French issue.
Well, the conscription is an interesting point because it first was brought in the First World War, and it did a little split on the country, but primarily it destroyed the Liberal Party, which was Mackenzie King's vehicle for power, and he was more than aware of that. So during the Second World War, he really hedged conscription off. Canadian troops, other than a few disastrous episodes in Hong Kong where we lost 2,000 men, and of course at Dieppe, the Canadian Army sat in England until mid-1943. But while the Australians and the New Zealanders and the British and everyone else was fighting, the Canadian troops were sitting there primarily because of Mackenzie King.
But guys joined the war differently. Like in World War I, they're naive, right? They didn't know about the war. In World War II, they had to go. Tom Brokaw wrote that book called The Best Generation. He said the last great generation of men was the guys who went to war in World War II.
Well, we had 2 of those generations. Our First World War generation is exceptional. And it's actually, they're the first generation of Canadians. They go overseas as British colonials, and they come back as Canadians. In fact, even the Toronto Maple Leafs got their name from the First World War and the pride associated with the Canadian Corps and their victories in 1917 and 1918. So it's the birth of Canada. What the failure of those men was they did not get politically active as a group. And they basically moved on and they let other people take over, and then they sort of ran us into a mess. And in the Second World War, our Second World War generation also did not get involved in politics. This is the difference between the American or Brokaw's generation and our 2 generations.
But what about now, when guys go to war, do they go for the same reason?
It's a professional force now. It's like joining the police force. This is what you're agreeing to do. You're agreeing to go overseas and defend your country's interests.
Do you think less people will enlist now because of everything from history and what we know, or do you think that more people will enlist?
If they see justice in the cause, they'll usually go for it.
I think it's probably going to even it out. Fewer people will because they are afraid to go to war. More people will because of the patriotic feeling of, I'm going to get in there now and do my part.
Less people are probably going to be getting in hoping to, you know, clean offices.
All right, let's jump out. Nice job, panel. Thanks, Norm, for coming in. Can you hang in for another segment? Sure. That was excellent. We're talking to Norm Christie, author and historian, talking about anti-heroes. Is Canada too hard on its heroes? And next segment, we're going to talk about would you send your son to war? We're coming back.
They basically brought in conscription.
I've got to stop French.
Welcome back to Real Men. We're joined today by Norm Christie, author and historian. He's adding a lot of weight to the panel. Thanks for coming in, Norm.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. This segment, we're going to talk about would you send your son to war? And I know, Steve Brinder, you've got a boy. What do you think about that topic?
I have to be honest with you. To play it safe, to be smart, I would say, if the cause was good, yes. But secretly, no. He's a beautiful little boy. And to think that he would go to war and not come home would kill me. Would kill me now. And I just can't say. I'd have to sit down and talk to him about it. But war is different now. War is by push button now. You press a button and someone dies 3 miles away. So
is it a Nintendo war now, Norm?
No, well, it is to a certain extent for the armaments, but ultimately someone has to go in and someone has to pay the price. And making these decisions on an individual basis are horrific. I mean, I've seen firsthand of people. My own cousin was killed in Vietnam in '68, and I saw what it did to his family. It destroyed them. But you're talking about the individual decision and the collective decision. And if you go by individual decisions, you'd never make any decisions at all.
Did he decide to go off by himself, or was he?
He was a rich kid who smashed up a bunch of cars. He was 17, so his father said, "We're going to, put you in the army and give you a little bit of discipline." And he said, "Good on." He wants to join the airborne.
And how does his father
Sign him
feel
up.
now?
Well, the thing.
His father never recovered from that.
Okay.
No.
And going back to the original, like, why do guys go to war? In Vietnam, very idealistic. I mean, the country was completely divided, right? You got hippies on one side, you got people that are like, this is the domino theory, things are going to fall. And basically, what happened in Vietnam was when Nixon said, we're going to pull out in 1970, I guess in 1970, he said, we're going to start pulling out, the troops went, why are we going to Vietnam now? They were fighting very hard until then. People have this perception that Americans they were fighting so hard until the president said, we're going to start withdrawing troops. They were like, well, I don't want to go.
Those guys are between a rock and a hard place. Because
Totally.
They did their job and they went through and,
Today
it's
well.
interesting.
Like this drug use thing didn't start until the 70s, And,
drug use, but they also, they couldn't really win.
No.
The war wasn't a real war. And what's interesting, though, when you talk to the guys today, they're part of history. And it's almost like a continuum effect of this, where they link into their pasts and they link up with all the people who've gone before. And there's this very strange, almost philosophical approach to this. And they're now part of history. And they were at Quai Son or they were at Hue, and they wear it with a certain badge of honor.
I'm with George Carlin, too. On his last special, he said post-traumatic stress disorder, let's call it shell shock. That sounds like what it is. We're getting a lot of syllables involved. Is that part of the problem too? Is just that?
Well, are we weaker? Are we weaker people than we were 50 years ago? I mean, these guys coming out of the Depression were really tough.
Yeah.
You see it in hockey now. They say, well, they're big hockey players. Well, a little tough guy from the Depression was a lot tougher than a guy from any suburb of Toronto. Ted Lindsay's going to take your head off because of when he grows up. These are a tough generation of people, and they're going against a tough generation in Afghanistan. And they have to be
and they had this 60 Minutes was talking about how in Afghanistan they'll fight for 2 weeks without food or and they'll keep fighting.
Really
Yet the Americans need their cigarette break every 4 hours. So how can those two armies go at each other when they're
Well, they're not full armies though. You think you've got specialist troops, and the whole idea in this situation is that the specialist troops who are looking forward to the war, it's like with the French Foreign Legion. These guys sign up to go to war, and when they get an opportunity, they're looking forward to it.
Delta Force,
They wanna
Delta
go.
Force,
They're dying.
all they want to do
let's
is
go for it.
But a lot of people don't want to send their kid to war because the war ends and they still keep fighting over it. World War I, they were called the Lost Generation. These guys are all mangled. We fight for World War II. I think people are more weary now. Like, you don't just send your kid out there and to save the world because the world ain't going to be saved.
Normal, the day come in Canada ever again where we are going to, guys like Steve are going to be faced with the question of whether to send their kid or not?
Well, I've got my son as well. He's now at 13, and I don't know if I could ever send him to war. But if he wanted to make a choice, then
like
he
a
would have to
punishment?
well, they don't say anything about the people on the home front. You're dying. Imagine in the First World War with all these telegrams. You're talking
that was
one
the
is
problem.
6 killed. That means these telegrams are coming back, and you're seeing that on bicycles. These guys are delivering these telegrams.
13-year-old boys.
And I'll tell you, they would be unreal. It was a 13-year-old killed in the First World War.
Yeah.
It really comes down to what is the reason? Like, we all get asked that question, would you send your son to war? So hypothetical. I don't know what the reason is going to be. And I think since September 11th, more of us have thought, gee, there could be. Prior to September 11th, I bet everyone thought, there's no reason I will ever have to send my kid to war again. Since then, everyone's just even slightly pondering the question, geez, it's possible.
But
we've been delusional. We've been delusional, haven't we, really?
Yes.
I mean, this war's been
Yes.
going on for 40,000 years. People have been killing each other. There's always bullies and whatnot. And we were living in a fantasy world.
And
but I think
there's
that,
romance to it, too.
But I think that also it says a lot about hope. That we have hope that we won't have to keep fighting these wars, even though we always do.
Well, human nature always has hope.
Exactly.
Just
You know,
whether it's misplaced or not.
Yeah.
In the movie Top Gun, when it came out, guys, like the week later, they were lined up to sign up. Lined up to sign up because it was so exciting. And
Well, that's
still that
veterans
attraction.
say
They're gonna get
It's
Kelly
still the
McGillis, that's why.
attraction, you know?
The
that
veterans
attraction
say
of
this,
war.
and the World War II guy was interviewed somewhere, and he was saying that you did not have our lows, but you didn't have our highs either. And for some reason, something in human nature, the closer you are to death, the more you are alive. And if you take the converse of that, the further from death you are, the less you are alive.
What people do thrill sports, right?
Well, absolutely. And,
if someone was going to be drafted, what's the age? What's the ceiling?
I don't think Canada's even thought about drafting
I don't
since
think we
No, we
42
could
or
get away with it.
43.
So it's
Well, I
not
don't think it
going
would
to.
work
So you
anymore.
have to go volunteer. You have to.
Yeah,
And you get a lot of volunteers.
What if they
People
don't get
do
enough
volunteer.
volunteers, though? Like, what if something happened and they
We'd
didn't...
have to be invaded.
Well,
But
Should we be
you'd have to,
military
yeah.
ready?
I think so.
And
Should we
basically,
be military ready? Should we have training?
Oh,
just in case to defend
well,
the
we should be a
country?
lot more ready than we are.
Yeah,
We got-
because
we
Right
gotta
now,
jump
we're
out.
useless.
We got to jump out. Nice job, panel. Just a couple more minutes left on Real Men, so stay with us. We're joined by Norm Christie, author, historian. We're talking about would you send your son to war? Stay with
I
us.
think the evolution of the Canadian military is kind of proud heritage. I think because it's just small force of actual fighting, you almost feel like you have to be militia.
Welcome back. We're talking about would you send your son to war? And we're joined by Norm Christie, author and
Neither is
historian.
Germany.
Thanks for coming in, Norm. Do we need more education in Canada,
we both
Norm, as far as our military heroes and the history and
Well, I
stuff?
think we need to get a better feel for who we are as Canadians. I think there's a deep malaise that's running through the country, and I think it's a lot of our problems today are coming from our lack of sense of being Canadian.
When I was in Holland, Norm, my friend and I were in this bar, and they found out we were Canadians, and they just started dumping beers over our heads and ringing this bell and yelling Canada, Canada, even though they couldn't speak any English. And we liberated them, and they seem more proud of Canada than we were.
I think that it seems to me that Canadians sometimes are more proud they're not Americans than the fact that they're Canadians.
yeah, this thing about, Canadians are afraid to flag wave because they think that means we're going to be like the United States. But you can flag wave with a different attitude behind it. You can still go, yay, Canada,
Pride rather
and
than
not
jingoism.
Exactly.
Right, right.
I think that's
That's
really
the real
hard, though.
sense.
If you're really proud, you don't have to shake a flag. You just say, we're okay, we're cool.
But
once you start waving the flag, that's starting, come on, we got to all get together.
Not
and it's
necessarily.
like,
I disagree with that. I disagree. There's a different attitude behind the flag waving that we
Time
can
and a
have.
place. Time and a place for everything.
Somebody the other day wore an I Am Canadian shirt on the set. It said, I am Canadian, had a Canadian flag, and I was like, how many countries can wear a shirt like that? Like, I am Swiss.
Have
You know
a beer.
You know what I mean? Like, I am Canadian looked so good. It was kind of, that is our pride. It's like,
Yeah.
I am Canadian.
Yeah.
That's all you need to say, you
You're
know?
hard-pressed to find anybody who's going to be offended by the fact that you're a Canadian.
Exactly.
You
Like,
come from a society that lets everybody just kind of be. Well, that's crazy.
But it's still the Americans that have saved this world in World War I and World War II, and when anything goes wrong, we always turn to the Americans. Where are they? And we
I think if you watch
Saving
Saving Private Ryan, you'd believe that. Do you find movies like that are a little misleading because they don't show the Allied forces?
Well, they don't, and I think as we were talking about earlier, Andy Rooney has a nice piece, and every time he talks about D-Day, which he always does, he always makes sure the Canadians are mentioned. We have to tell our own stories.
That's
we
what I'm
can't
talking
ask
about.
somebody else to tell our stories.
That's right.
And I don't understand why we don't.
Thanks for coming in, Norm. That was great, man. That was really cool. We do have to tell our own stories, and we got to be damn proud. And if you got a flag, wave it. Thanks for coming in. We're out.
I'm Canadian. Sleep with me.
Nice job,
I am a
guys.
beer.
That was great.
Wait,
I have a
Tim
beer.
told me the story about when he went to Amsterdam. It freaked me out how.
Towed my car away. One of the
Did they in
I
Amsterdam?
had a Canadian flag on the back.
One of the nicest things I ever saw was
was
when they came back like the anniversary of the liberation, and you saw these old guys and people.
My grandmother went there.
Well, because you don't get it here. You don't get it here.
Not just that. They have to do These kids have to do it.